Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Carving It Up Live right here on Facebook Live, YouTube, and on Twitter. As always, I'm Bryson Carver. We've got a great show for you guys today. This is a little bit more of a different show. We're obviously going to hit on some of the more major stories in sports. Some of them I'm actually going to save for tomorrow's show because I think I don't want to just cram them into what we want to do on the show today. I think they deserve their own segment. But I'm going to discuss obviously the Bruce Arians, Todd Bowles situation. Bruce Arians stepping down, Todd Bowles, the new head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as well as Jason Kidd had a take on LeBron and Michael Jordan. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I can't get on board with what he's saying, and I'll discuss that in a second. After that, I'm going to have a special guest on the show. Not going to reveal to you who it is yet, but it's going to be a how do I say it? It's going to be like sort of an announcement, I guess, a special announcement is what you would call it for Carving It Up. Something we're going to be doing, I along with the guests I'm going to be having on in about 20 minutes or so. But I think you guys are going to be fairly interested in that. And at the end of the show, I'm going to discuss the NFL's new overtime rules. I don't like it personally, but I'm going to discuss and kind of further elaborate on that as the show goes on. But first, let's start with the breaking story from last night. Bruce Arians stepping down as the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He will now become a member of the front office. And let me start with my reaction to that. First of all, it doesn't surprise me at all. Because I think with Bruce Arians, the thing that you got to realize is, look, he's about 70 years old, more or less, right? He's getting up there in age. He has coached for a long time. And I think the aspect maybe of today's NFL, I don't think he just hasn't adapted to it. But I think at the end of the day for him, he recognizes that this team, Tom Brady coming back, it needs a new breath of fresh air, if you will. And so I think that factors in. And so I also think for Tampa Bay, honestly, is there any team in the league that was put in a better situation to be able to that quickly move on from their head coach than Tampa? Because they didn't have one. They had two head coaching candidates on their coaching staff, okay? You had Byron Leftwich, the offensive coordinator. You had Todd Bowles, the defensive coordinator. Now, when I saw the alert on my phone, Bruce Arians stepping down, I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be Byron Leftwich, right? Because Brady's coming back. They added offensive pieces, offensive coach, young, innovative. I figured that would be the direction that they would go. It was not. They decided to go with Todd Bowles, which I understand as well because of the fact that, hey, he does have head coaching experience. You know, the Jets last year being relevant was under Todd Bowles. Right, they went 10-6 in 2015, and if they'd have not blown it in a Week 17 game at Buffalo, they'd have gotten the playoffs. And who knows what would have happened? That roster was not great, folks. I mean, the defense was good, but offensively, folks, we're talking about guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick and an old Brandon Marshall and an old Eric Decker and an old Matt Forte and a older offensive line. That guy, Todd Bowles, got that Jets roster to 10-6, beat New England in the second to last week of the season. It actually cost the Patriots the home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And so he's proven that even in a dumpster fire of a franchise, which the New York Jets clearly are, he can be successful. So I like the move for Tampa, elevating him to this position. But I do want to address the fact that I see there's a lot of people out there, even I would say the majority of the media, is sort of going along with this, that Tom Brady is the reason that Bruce is stepping down. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Because Tom Brady, let's be real, okay? There have been reports of friction between Tom and Bruce. They pale in comparison to the friction between Tom and Bill, okay? And that went on for 20 years. And Bill was a defensive coach too. And so when I look at that, I think you could argue, hey, the timing of this is a little weird that, 2 weeks or so after Tom Brady announces I'm coming back, all of a sudden Bruce Arians is no longer the head coach. But what I would argue is now Tampa Bay's looking at say, okay, we ran it back. Was Bruce Arians the first go around? Maybe he had a chance to step back and look at the 2020 season. And I'm not here to bash Bruce Arians. I think he's a really good head coach. But Tampa's looking at this like, okay, is Bruce Arians one of the major factors that we got to and won the Super Bowl. Because a lot of people argue, I mean, I don't think it's much of an argument, but people argue, hey, once they got to the playoffs, was it Brady? Was it the defense? Now, I think both deserve credit, but my take on it is they don't even make the playoffs if not for Tom Brady. So, but Tom got him there, okay? And you have excellent receiving talent: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown at the time. You had Gronk, you had Cameron Brate, you had a good running game with Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones, and then defensively, I don't think they deserve the most credit, but they deserve a lot of it. Shaq Barrett, JPP, and Ndamukong Suh up front. Vita Vea, although he was beat up most of 2020, but he came back in the playoffs. You look at guys, obviously, like Levante David, who's the seasoned vet, and the young gun, Devin White. And a decent secondary that they had that held up against some of the better receivers in football. Devontae Adams in the NFC Championship game. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce in the Super Bowl. We got to go down a lot of levels before we finally get to Bruce Arians. And last year, let's be honest, in the playoff game against the Rams, that team did not look ready to play. And I always put that on the head coach. I'm not saying it was a fireable offense for Arians, but I think what Tampa Bay is seeing is that, hey, Tom's coming back. We had our fingers crossed. He's back. We added to our roster. Matter of fact, we probably made our roster better because we added Russell Gage. We added Shaq Mason to our offensive line, which was, a little bit in flux now. We're bringing back a lot of our key guys. We brought back Chris Godwin. Does Gronk come back? I mean, I would think so. I would think Gronk would be coming back. If not, if Gronk's not coming to Tampa, Gronk's retiring. And so when I look at that, they're saying, okay, we need some youth. We need some vigor in that head coaching position. Todd Bowles is the guy to do it. Todd Bowles is the guy to do it. Because, again, he took a below-average roster with the Jets and came that close with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was not Fitzmagic on most Sundays. Almost got that to the playoffs. In a pretty good AFC that year. Look at the standings of the AFC. It was no joke. So, I like the move by Tampa. I think it makes them better. I think it gives them a better shot to win the NFC and possibly win the Super Bowl when it's all said and done. Also, what I think it does is now I think Tom and Byron Leftwich probably have more say in the offense than they did initially. Because with all due respect to Bruce Arians, and who is a good offensive mind, there were reports, especially in 2020, the Super Bowl winning year, about Tom being a little frustrated and Bruce, on the other hand, being a little frustrated with each other, a little bit of, butted heads a little bit on offensive philosophies. And eventually Bruce caved into Tom at the end of 2020. I mean, after the Tampa bye week, and I guess it was week 13, the offense didn't even look the same. It looked like New England's offense, right? A lot of get it out quick, a lot of screen passes, things of that nature. Not a ton of shots down the field like Bruce Arians wants, right? No risk it, no biscuit. And so now the offense is run by Tom and Byron Leftwich. So I think this makes Tampa Bay better. Also, gives Bruce a chance. He still gets to be around the game. We know Bruce Arians, as much as the next coach, loves the game of football. And I also I really don't want to sound like I'm bashing Bruce Arians because I do have a lot of respect for the guy. I want to give him a tip of the cap for, we got some of these new Rooney Rule rules, and he's saying, no, screw that. On my own, I'm going to give my player or give coaches a chance to succeed. Hire Todd Bowles, hire Byron Leftwich, right? I believe he has 2 women on his staff. I believe the special teams coordinator is black. So credit to Bruce Arians for, being able to embrace that and give these people opportunities that they deserve. And, but yeah, hats off to him. But I think this move makes Tampa Bay better, without a question. Got quite a few comments here by Grady Edwards, who is a Tom Brady fan because he is a Patriots fan. He says, I'm so split on what to think about the Arians retirement, thinking it was both. Arians wanted to retire. I think Brady played next year under him without a doubt, but he preferred someone else with a similar philosophy. I could see that, yeah. Arians is a better version of John Fox. I think he would have gotten a shot earlier in his life of being a head coach. He would have been a Hall of Fame head coach. I was shocked if he coaches somewhere in 2 to 3 years. Guy is a darn good coach. He says, wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I think it's possible. Certainly we've seen with specifically Saban and Belichick, the age thing is almost irrelevant at this point. And so I think that when they're looking at this, they're saying, I don't think the age is going to come into factor if Bruce Arians does win a job in the future. Because let's be honest, he's better than quite a few coaches currently in the league. I think the Chargers could use him. I mean, do you think the Chargers wouldn't take Bruce Arians over Brandon Staley with Bruce Arians' history of working with quarterbacks? I mean, Peyton, Big Ben, Andrew Luck, Carson Palmer, Tom Brady. A lot of these guys have had their best seasons under Bruce, so I think that stuff matters. But again, it did catch me off guard. I'm not gonna lie, but it is what it is. Let's see. All right, we got I guess a little bit of breaking news from Shams Charania as we speak is tweeting out the Hall of Fame inductees for 2022 not for the NBA, just for basketball in general. Manu Ginobili's in, Swin Cash is in, Tim Hardaway finally is in, Bob Huggins is in. So, all right, so I guess these are going to continue to come through, but pretty strong Hall of Fame class right there. It's not the class of what year was it? 2020 that was the loaded cast, because you had obviously Kobe, rest in peace, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan. I mean, that Hall of Fame class was just, it was ridiculous. It was insanely loaded. But this was not half too bad either. Moving on now to Jason Kidd. By the way, and I will reiterate what I said on the show about 2-3 weeks ago, whatever it was. My apologies to Jason Kidd, because I was dead wrong about how he would do in Dallas. I thought it was a downgrade from Rick Carlisle, but Rick Carlisle's in Indiana, and that's not exactly going the greatest as we speak. But Jason Kidd was asked after the Mavericks win over the Cavaliers last night. By the way, the Mavericks just jumped my Warriors for the 3 seed. I don't want to talk about the Warriors right now. We need Steph back ASAP. But Jason Kidd was asked about LeBron passing Kareem. He was asked if passing Kareem would make LeBron James the greatest basketball player of all time. More specifically, LeBron James passing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the most points in NBA history. Of course, he's now in second. And Jason Kidd said, quote, "I think LeBron will go down as the greatest to do it. When you look at his numbers, what he's done on and off the floor, nobody's done that. When you put the whole package together, he's the greatest of all time." Now, certainly, if you're talking about off the court, LeBron has exceeded MJ times 25 in terms of what he's done for people off the court, and that's not a jab at MJ, who has in recent years used his platform for good. But and John's here to rub it in a little bit, but he's right. He says, "Told you, Kidd can coach. He should be the Lakers coach right now." I gotta admit, John, I don't even think Jason Kidd being in Los Angeles would even make a huge difference. I'm serious. I don't think it would. Maybe they'd have a few more wins. I think he's proven at least this year to be a better coach than Vogel. But it's not going to. The Lakers are a mess. I gave my solution yesterday for what the Lakers need to do. I'm sorry, not yesterday, Monday. Grady says, off-topic question before I continue the Jason Kidd thing. Off-topic question, do you have any thoughts on Tiger Woods potentially teeing it up at Augusta? Would be another crazy achievement by him. Listen, my dad brought that to me the other day. I said, you're crazy. And then I'm starting to see some of the reports that are coming out. I can't imagine him actually, barely a year removed from a scary, scary, scary car accident. It would be unbelievable. That's all I'll say. It would be unbelievable if he does in fact compete. John says, and I was wrong about the Lakers. Sheesh, shaking my head. Yeah, I mean, what's funny, John? I had John on the show. Sorry to get off topic, but I had John on the show to discuss to do the NBA season special when the season started, and I thought people said, Bryson, you're underrating the Lakers. I had them as the 5 seed. I overrated the Lakers. So you don't have nothing to apologize for, John. Even I overrated them. I had them at 5, and people were like, "You are out of your mind." Well, I guess technically you were right. I was out of my mind. But back to Jason Kidd. So he's saying once it's all said and done, and especially once he passes Kareem, LeBron James will be known as the greatest basketball player of all time. Now, I have religiously said on this show, I've always been consistent on this. I do not think you can make any list involving the greatest basketball players of all time and not include Michael Jordan, LeBron James in your top two. You think LeBron's a GOAT? Fine. You think Jordan's a GOAT? Fine. Those are the two best. It is undebatable. Love Kareem, love Kobe, love Magic, who round out my top five. They're not in those two guys' league, with all due respect to all of them. Here's the thing. And you know, I love LeBron James, but in terms of accomplishments, and especially in LeBron's case, in so very little time, I mean, you have to give it to Jordan. Because at the end of the day, look, Michael Jordan, more titles than LeBron, more finals MVPs than LeBron, more league MVPs than LeBron, way more scoring championships than LeBron, more steals titles. He's got a defensive player of the year. LeBron does not. And sticking with defense, he has 9 all defensive team awards. LeBron has 6. And so when I look at it, it's how is it not Michael is my question. Because when you look at the impact on both ends, you look at the consistency as he continued to get older. I mean, Michael's second retirement, obviously he had the first one after the first three-peat, the second after the second three-peat. He was in his upper 30s, right? He's 35, 36, and this is in an era where players did not age back then like they do now, okay? Back then, we didn't have Tom Brady at 43, 44 years old, or what is he? Is he 45? I lost track. But we didn't have quarterbacks playing till their mid-40s and having one of the best seasons of their careers. And likewise in basketball. I mean, your prime was over at like age 31. So with Michael, I look at the impact on one end. On the other end, we're talking about efficiency. We're talking about the prowess on the defensive side of the floor. I mean, Michael Jordan came into, we talk about LeBron coming into a joke of a franchise, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And he deserves an immense amount of credit for that. I mean, because we saw both times he left, both times they were a mess. Michael Jordan walked into the Chicago Bulls. You know what they called it? If you didn't watch The Last Dance, they called the Chicago Bulls of a time Michael Jordan was drafted in 1984 the traveling cocaine circus. That's what Michael walked in. The team was so bad, and this is with all due respect to Jordan, but the team was so bad. Michael walks in, and by the first practice, coach was like, yep, that's the best player. That's the best, okay? And so you look at that. You look at the legendary playoff performance that he had early in his career. I mean, who could forget the 63-point game at Boston Garden against the 86 Celtics, 87 Celtics, which were one of the greatest teams of all time. I mean, Bird, McHale, Parrish, on from there. Michael dropped 63 against that team. He had the greatest mid-range game ever. One of the greatest handles ever for a guard that we've ever seen. Okay? You look at the fact that, again, defensively, could lock you down. I mean, if you polled all 30 general managers in the entire National Basketball Association, they said, you can start, you have no players. Okay, you're empty. You don't have 15, you don't have 2. You're out. LeBron or Michael? I would guess 20, 25 at least would take Michael. Because if he keeps playing, if he wasn't so adamant in 1998 that if Phil retires, or not Phil retires, if Phil is fired, I'm done. He probably wins another championship, 2 maybe. I mean, I would have given anything to see, well, of course I wasn't alive at the time, but, you know, I think as NBA fans would have given anything to see the 99 NBA Finals. Instead of Knicks versus Spurs, we'd have liked to have seen Bulls versus Spurs, right? Michael and Scotty versus, you know, David Robinson and a young Tim Duncan. Phil Jackson versus Greg Popovich. Are you kidding me? It doesn't get better than that. So, and something else too. And LeBron has teamed up with some, you know, obviously he goes to Miami with Wade and Bosh. As great as those Heat teams were, the Heatles, as they called them, Did anybody ever consider the Miami Heat the greatest, or at least in the consideration, as one of the greatest teams of all time? No. And Braun was in the middle of his prime. And D. Wade was at the end of his prime, but still in his prime. And Chris Bosh was still effective. And they had Eric Spoelstra, who was ranked one of the top 15 coaches ever. And a great bench and a smart roster. Who had a great run. But we don't even talk about the Heat of the 2010s. We don't even talk about them as the best team in their own decade. That's the Warriors. That's the Steph, Clay, KD Warriors. Michael was a part of, obviously, the 95-96 Bulls. A lot of people, including myself, consider it, in terms of success from start of season to, the championship, the greatest team ever. We think about 98 and the season that Michael had. In 1998, Michael Jordan won All-Star Game MVP, regular season MVP, Finals MVP. It's never been done before, outside of Shaq. Right? Tim Duncan may have done it too, but that's a group he's a part of. So, and I love Jason Kidd. And again, I will reiterate, boy, was I wrong on the Dallas Mavericks this year. I think, honest to God, I think they're legit title contenders over Memphis. I would take them in a 7-game series over the Memphis Grizzlies. But Jason Kidd, my man, and I know you coached LeBron for a couple of years there in LA. I'm taking Michael. Now, last point before we move on. Do I think LeBron still has a shot to catch Michael? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because LeBron's case is, I won a championship in Cleveland. Cleveland. Nobody wins anything in Cleveland. I played at a high level for 2 decades. Right? And we go on and on and on. I'm going to be the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Knock on wood, he doesn't get injured. That's what he can say. So that's his boast, and I get that. And he can still add on to that. I will say, though, if he wants to win a championship in Los Angeles, as I said on Monday, there's got to be a major just roster overhaul. Everybody. Just get everybody out except for, like, Malik Monk. And, of course, LeBron. Get Westbrook out, get Anthony Davis out, and just, go from there. A few comments before we move on to this, to our special guest, to our special announcement. Grady says, this season hurts Westbrook's legacy big time, and in terms of the GOAT debate, it hurts LeBron's too. Not his legacy per se, but as far as the greatest ever. You could make that argument, although I would say, the Jordan Wizard years didn't. Here's the thing. I don't think the Jordan Wizards years hurt his legacy, but it didn't help. I think this is kind of the same thing with LeBron. Westbrook, it's, obviously it does hurt his legacy because he doesn't have any championships. Because he hasn't evolved his game like some of the other great players. John, who's a diehard Bulls fan. Yeah, I don't argue about it, but Jordan's still it for me. Grady says the Wizards season don't hurt Jordan because he wasn't even the same player at that point. Excuse me. Dude was coming back fat or out of shape after almost 4 years off, and he knew that. He did, and he really came back to the Wizards. He had to play. He had to kind of scratch the competitive itch. But more than anything, he wanted to come back and kind of have control of the franchise. I believe he might have been a part owner at the time of the Wizards. Again, like the one wish, like my number one basketball wish is that we got to see LeBron versus Kobe in an NBA Finals, and we came close a couple times. And my number 2 wish is that we got to see just one time Michael versus LeBron. Now, I know it would have been old Michael and a very young LeBron, but still, at least we could have been able to say, that those two matched up against one another. Okay, so with this show, with carving it up, I've obviously, I would say 95 to 97.2% of the show has been sports related. I think it's safe to say, obviously, we did discuss Will Smith, Chris Rock on Monday, but overwhelmingly, it's a sports show. But, with this and with sort of the brand change that occurred in January, with certain things we got in the future for the show that I will not discuss quite yet. With this show, I kind of wanted to expand it a little bit. And, with my interest not just in the world of sports, I wanted to kind of go into this new sort of arena, if you will. And so what I'm going to be doing, what we're going to be doing, my next guest, I'm going to bring him on in just a second. What we're going to be doing is a 10-part podcast series, It's going to start next Saturday, April 9th. It's going to, it's going to air like in the morning, probably around 7 o'clock Eastern, 7 a.m. Eastern. I and my co-host, who is my guest, is going to be discussing U.S. presidential history. Now, you're going to say, oh, come on, Bryson, this is boring. Are you kidding me? It's really not. Trust me. And this may shock some people, but I have actually been a fan of U.S. presidents, or at least U.S. presidential history, longer than I've been a sports fan, which may surprise some people, but that is actually the case. And so, without further ado, let's bring on our next guest. He is a good buddy of mine. He is, I mean, you think I'm interested in presidents, and you're going to see that throughout the series. He's got me beat 20-1, maybe, if not more than that. Joining the show now is Isaac Lawson on Carving It Up Live. Isaac, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Again, we had, and you'll see this later in the series, we had some real technical issues before one of the episodes we recorded. But Isaac, for the first time Carving Up Live, it is great to have you on, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here. Good to make my debut on the show.
Absolutely. And you're going to be making plenty more appearances, obviously, through this series. So, and I asked you this question to start episode 1, which we recorded months ago. What is kind of, I would say, what would say is the genesis of your interest in U.S. presidents?
And, it's a good question, but it's also one of the hardest for me to answer because I'm really not totally sure. I've always kind of been drawn to history, but there's just something about political history and the history of that office that I just find so interesting. The way that it just ties into so many different facets of the American story and the way that this country has developed over time, and the way that it just ties into culture and even world history is just so impressive to me. It's really interesting to see the way that these different men have helped shape the history of the nation that you and I call home, but also the world as we know it. And I just find it incredibly interesting.
Absolutely. And that's kind of why I wanted to do the series and why I wanted to have you on to bring the series, because you share the same interest. I think what you're going to see throughout this series, of course, we all know, President Biden is technically the 46th president, but of course, there was one president in between who served 2 non-consecutive terms. So technically 45 men have occupied that office. But I think what the people are going to see in the series is how the complexities of not just the party that these men have been affiliated with their certain ideologies, but really even their character has affected the office greatly. And I think that's what's going to be very interesting about it. What do you think? What's, in your opinion, the thing that the audience, the number one thing in your opinion is that the audience is going to kind of take home with them and going to really take away from the series that's, again, going to air April 9th?
I think that one thing that I've noticed as we've recorded it is just how much these different eras and these different presidencies just build on each other, and how there are some topics that we'll talk about in the first episode that we will wind up talking about all the way up until presidencies in the 1970s. These issues that seemingly happened a long time ago and don't seem to really be in the forefront of our mind anymore are really actually consistent problems that we're still debating and discussing and finding solutions for. I think it's really interesting to see that. I think that's one of the things that really stands out to me in the way that we've covered this series so far, is just that there is a kind of a fluidity to the issues in our nation, and it's in some ways a constant, more than kind of like a stagnant pool of what we're dealing with at one time.
100%. And obviously, as you mentioned, the issues, the topics do evolve without a question. We come across new conversations. But what I think is the fascinating part about it is the fact that things that, as far back as of course 1776 when the country first came to be, to 1789 when the first president, George Washington, took the oath of office, is that the things that those men 200 plus years ago, we're still debating to this very day. We have a couple of comments here. My man Grady Edwards loves the news. He says, "Dude, I love this news." That's the thing. That's what I think that is going to be really fascinating. Is it's not your typical, sort of political, or even I would say a History Channel, so to speak, like series on the presidents. I compared it in the first episode. It's as if you were looking back at your significant other, your ex, and maybe they weren't as great as you really thought they were, and maybe they're not as horrible and as big of a monster as you thought they were either, or maybe they will meet those expectations. It's the fluidity of the people that have served in the office and so on and so forth. But again, the reason I wanted to do this is to tell the sort of honest, objective story of how we got here in America, through the presidents. Obviously, events before and after, shape that. But I think the story of the country is best told through the presidents. And so sort of who, in your opinion, as in terms of fascination, in terms of the impact that they had in the office and on the country, give me a few names. Who would you say and why is some of the more fascinating presidents to you?
Well, for one, that in the episode that we most recently recorded, Richard Nixon is so interesting. He just had a really long career in public office and so much experience building up to his time in the presidency, and just as a personal figure, just has such an interesting and complex life. And it's I described it to you. He's so interesting because it's just like. He has all these different issues and things that he's constantly working through, and he always kind of gets close to kind of overcoming this hurdle, and he just never quite gets there. And if you ever read a good biography of Nixon, it's so frustrating, but there's just something about it that few other people can invoke that same feeling, for better or worse. I think there's always like the big figures, like, the Lincolns and the Washingtons are always going to be interesting. There's a reason why, we're so drawn to them. But some that I particularly like, I really like reading about Benjamin Harrison. I've recently been reading about a little bit, or James A. Garfield, are some that just had interesting lives and interesting events going on during their presidencies that don't get discussed as much. There's something just about each of them that I just feel drawn to, and just find something, I don't know, at least one good story about, if nothing more.
Yeah, and that's what's also great about it is, you do have these fascinating figures. You have, and this isn't just true of the presidency, this is true of just, everyday people that you meet in life, is very complex people. You give the example of Nixon. Richard Nixon was a guy, for example, who was a fairly skilled politician. He had a very successful career, obviously up until the scandals of Watergate. But it's kind of like diving into these people. What made them tick? Why did they make the decisions they made? Sort of, we can tell the what ifs. What if this happened? What if this happens? Got a few comments here, right here. John, my man, he says Bryson for president 2040. I love you, John. I can't say I have any interest in running for political office in any time in the near future. Grady says, I feel like Nixon also had the most portrayal in movies for some reason. Watch X-Men Days of the Future Past if you want a funny portrayal of him. Yeah, I think so. It seemed like we get a lot of really bad Nixon sort of impressions like we see on like late night shows. This is fascinating. Grady says, not proud of what he did, but I am related to Andrew Jackson. I did not know that. That is fascinating. Obviously, we will cover Jackson. I mean, that's another name too, Isaac, is somebody who is, personally nuts. I mean, I think we would both agree. So he's not wired like your everyday individual, but like, talk about Andrew Jackson, for example. Like what do you think? Why do you think, even despite the awful decisions he made, in terms of, obviously, we can talk about the Indian Removal Act and so on, why do you think Andrew Jackson, for example, we still talk about him to this day, even though on most lists he nobody really considers him like a top 15 president for the most part?
I think one reason is just that kind of the myth of Andrew Jackson is so interesting, because he was crazy and he did things that are just not outside of political norms for his time and still for our time. And it's interesting to imagine the idea of a president, almost getting assassinated and then almost beating his assassin to death with his cane. Like, that is just a crazy story. There are so many crazy stories about him. So I think that's one aspect to it. And then he also does have this aspect where, despite his really, really bad record on racial issues, he did kind of originate this idea that the non-rich kind of white male aristocracy, that they shouldn't be the only people that vote, that kind of all white men should have the ability to vote, and that it shouldn't be based off of kind of social status. And that idea, eventually spread outside of that group, thankfully, to more and more segments of society, and has kind of become an important aspect of American democracy. So I think it's kind of twofold there, that in kind of a turnabout way, that the idea that he kind of promulgated, helped lead to an expansion in, America's view of democracy, but also just that he was absolutely insane. So I think that he's a little twofold there. And then now there's kind of a renewed interest in, his handling of racial issues and the way that shaped that struggle going forward for the next century.
Right, and that's Andrew Jackson is a name that comes to mind that did spark a number of ideas that have persisted and sort of evolved, as you mentioned.
And have luckily
We
grown outside of his view on them.
absolutely, absolutely, and when I think of presidents, for example, that we think about, it seems like, especially in recent years, I don't know, Isaac, this is because of social media, maybe this is because of this very quick reaction culture that we live in now, but it seems like every president that leaves office, we just hate their guts, we can't wait, then the new president's going to be the second coming. But what do you think? Give me an example of a president who, because I know I can think of one off the top of my head right now that we talked about yesterday when we recorded one of the later episodes. Who's a president in your mind that left office and really wasn't, his legacy wasn't in a good place at all, at least among the people. But as time has gone on, people look back and say, hey, this guy's administration wasn't half bad.
Well, I'm sure I can guess the one that you're thinking of. One that comes to mind that there's kind of been some recent reassessment of their presidency, would be George H.W. Bush.
Mm,
For a long
yeah.
time after he lost his attempt at a second term, people kind of viewed his presidency as being one of kind of broken promises and not a lot going on, and people just feeling kind of let down by the Bush presidency. But especially after his death, there had been a lot of kind of reassessment of that, and they've said, there's a lot more here, than just that kind of letdown feeling at the very end of it. And there are actually other factors that played into him losing re-election, and that it really wasn't necessarily about successful policy or not in a lot of ways. A lot of it had to do with just kind of a sense that we needed to kind of move forward in a different direction. But the first Gulf War and even some of his economic policy that was criticized at the time have really kind of been viewed as successes in the long run, and that have been attributed to him.
For sure, and I mean, George H.W. Bush is certainly, in my view, I would put in that category of the presidents that I feel like we don't talk about enough. Maybe it's
Mhm.
because his obviously his son was president more recent, and obviously the presidents to follow his son. Who is a president in your mind that you don't think that we talk about enough? Like he kind of gets swept under the rug. We of course we know the big names, we know the Lincolns, we know the Washingtons and the Reagans and the Kennedys, but like who's a president like off the top of your head that is left a good mark on history, but we really don't give him credit, or we just don't talk about him, period.
Yeah, I think there are a couple that come to mind, but one that really not a lot of people talk about, that had a pretty important presidency, is William McKinley.
Yes.
Especially a lot of the involvements, such as like the Boxer Rebellion or the Spanish American War. Really kind of laid the groundwork for America really cementing itself as a world power after World War I. That kind of movement couldn't have happened without the McKinley presidency, and in a lot of ways without his leadership. He's one president that I think really has kind of been forgotten, in a lot of ways, but his presidency really affected a lot of important policy, in the 20th century.
It did, and I would say a big reason that McKinley's legacy has been somewhat forgotten is because of his successor Theodore Roosevelt, who's one of the
Hmm.
most colorful characters. I mean, I don't care, but forget presidential history. We're talking American history, and the impact he had in the office and on the country. That, like you said, McKinley's policies, Roosevelt's policies, both Roosevelt's policies, we still feel the effects of those to this very day, which again is something that I think is very fascinating about the series. Couple comments here. Grady asks, if I'm not mistaken, was it Jackson or John Quincy Adams, that was the first president photographed or caught in a version of early photography film? It was John Quincy Adams, who was photographed. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was 1843. He actually ran for office, or well, of course, he won in 1824. He beat Jackson. That's a whole nother discussion unto itself that, of course, we'll touch on in episode 2. But I think with John Quincy Adams, he serves as president for 4 years. He loses to Jackson again in 1828, and then he becomes a congressman. And it really, I would say his congressional career was far more successful than his time as president. But I think that's definitely something to discuss. I think that's what's the fun part about the series too, or at least maybe my favorite part about it, is looking at some of the elections, because 1824 is probably at the top of the list as far as, fasting. We think about, 1960, 1884 was a fascinating election, like just on from there. And so I would say, well, I don't want to ask what the most consequential election history would you say, because I would argue that's probably 1860 with Lincoln beating Stephen A. Douglas. But think of an election in your mind that, really kind of changed the course of history, given the events of the man who won.
There are several that stand out. One election that's really important was when we had, Tilden v. Hayes after the Grant presidency. That election resulted in the end of Reconstruction, and truthfully, even without the corrupt bargain and the compromise there that resulted in Hayes becoming president, if Tilden had become president, Reconstruction would have ended anyway.
Right.
As the Democrat candidate in that race. But it's really interesting because that election was one where Hayes lost the popular vote. They start, kind of panicking because the Republican Party of the day didn't want to lose the White House. So they essentially went to different states and tried to lobby them to just change their votes, to give him a majority in the Electoral College so that he could win. And this resulted in kind of an unofficial agreement between the two parties where they would let Hayes win and Reconstruction would end. It is just a hot mess. I think it's hard to find. There are others, but it's hard to find, I think, an election that was just so catastrophic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Oh, it was awful. When you look at what happened, and Hayes, of course, was the beneficiary of that. A couple comments here. John says, "Can't wait for a history lesson right now." Again, I'm just as excited as you, John. I mean, I know we've already. It's a 10, by the way, to explain sort of the format of the series. It's a 10-part series. The first 9 episodes, of course, we're divvying it up into the different presidents we're discussing, pretty much by era. But we're going to discuss all 46 presidents the first 9 episodes. And then on episode 10, that's where it gets really interesting. We are going to give our own personal list, ranking them. And what I think is fun about the rankings is, and we kind of, I asked you the question earlier about, whose president stock has kind of, risen in recent years. But that's what I think is fun about, as history changes, how the legacies of the presidents change, with the times, how these lists, ranking them, change. And that kind of leads into the next comment. Grady Edwards says, how do you feel like history will remember Obama and Trump? Maybe the Trump question isn't fair. Yeah, with him potentially running for re-election 2024. Not re-election, but a second term. But you know what I mean. Would that be considered, Isaac, re-election if Donald Trump were to win 2024? Because, of course, Grover Cleveland did so in 1880 or 1892. Yeah. Would that be considered re-election or just winning a second term outright?
I'm not sure that it would be re-election because it would be a separate administration. It would be considered, he would, therefore, if Trump were to run, he would be the 47th president, theoretically. Right. To answer that question, though, I think the jury's still out. I think, in my personal opinion, I think it takes a good 30 years at minimum for us to really get a good take on how we're beginning to kind of remember them. But I think, we're obviously we haven't recorded the episode yet where we're going to discuss them. I think Obama's presidency is going to be remembered as a point where the information age with technology advancing to a point where we now all have smartphones and social media is like really a thing. I think that's going to be an important thing that's kind of remembered in the way that his presidency is going to be interpreted. By historians, and I think also just the general mood that I feel like most Americans generally felt like it was a pretty stable era. But I think there are definitely going to be some controversies there, and I think that it's hard to say exactly what his legacy is going to be yet. I think for President Trump, especially being it only being what, a year and a half
Yeah,
since the
about
end of
that.
his administration. I think it's really hard to tell what his legacy is going to be yet. I think there are going to be a lot of events that are wrapped up in that. I think that, I think at some point his foreign policy will probably be reassessed. I think there were some moves there that I think were significant and that were positive. I think that there are also going to be critiques on the way that through social media use and those sort of things, he didn't do a great job of uniting the country. So I think that both have evolving legacies, and I think it'll be interesting to see how those kind of discussions and thoughts kind of play out over the next couple years.
Oh, for sure. And like you mentioned, George Bush Sr. earlier, and how his sort of legacy has been reassessed. Unfortunately, after his passing from a few years ago. But that tends to be not just in politics, but in general. That seems to be how we do. Like we don't really give you a fair shake until you're gone.
Mhm.
Grady asks, how much different do you feel like? This is a very good question. Do you feel like history would have worked regarding World War I had Roosevelt won in 1912 over Taft and Wilson? That is a good question, because before you go, Isaac, 1912, as we did that episode a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and it may have not in terms of the content that the candidates presented, but 1912 in terms of specifically the names was probably the greatest election we've ever had. Because when it was all said and done, we had the 26th, 27th, and 28th presidents all running
Mhm.
against one another. I don't know. I've never really thought about that, because obviously, like as you mentioned, Grady, World War I does come into play in, I believe, 1914, which is about a year and a half into Wilson's administration. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Isaac? If Teddy Roosevelt does win in 1912?
What I'm trying to think is if Roosevelt wins that election, do we get involved in the war or not? And
Sure.
I'm not sure how Teddy Roosevelt would have responded.
Hmm.
Because I could see in ways him taking an isolationist path there. But at the same time, you know, I could also see Teddy Roosevelt basically being like, somebody's got to be the older brother to come and break up the fight. Uh, um,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure. I think that theoretically in that scenario, if we did go to get involved in World War One under a President Teddy Roosevelt, I think all I could say is it. I pity the Germans for what for what his military strategy would have been.
For sure. And that's something I was thinking about too, because Teddy Roosevelt, we're talking about the two Roosevelts, both distant cousins, of course. Teddy Roosevelt's legacy, I think, is defined mostly off of domestic issues.
Hmm.
Obviously, the gap in the rich and the poor, and we're talking about obviously the economy flourished when he was president, and some of the laws that he got passed, safety precautions for certain things. Whereas, obviously the second Roosevelt, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, his legacy is defined by the Great Depression, by World War II. So that would have been very interesting to see how the two Roosevelts would have handled a world war, because FDR in World War II, he didn't join. A matter of fact, he had to be kind of coaxed in
Hmm.
by the Allied forces, starting, of course, with Winston Churchill. It wasn't until Pearl Harbor that he said, "Okay, this is the last straw. We have to join the war at this point." And so I'm telling you, that's a good question. I never really thought about that. But last question before I let you go, Isaac. What is sort of I asked you this earlier, but sort of put a bow on it. the number one thing that from this 10-part series, again, April 9th, real quick, let me go ahead and put up the logo that we got for us. So there you go. The Carving It Up U.S. President's Edition, Bryson Carver featuring Isaac Lawson. What's sort of the number one thing you want people to take away from the series that I think can apply, maybe to our everyday life and our knowledge about what's going on?
I think just at least being able to gain just an overview of these different administrations and seeing, like we already talked about, the way that our history is connected and fluid, I think is such an important thing for people to understand. History isn't stagnant. It's something that, we are actively making day to day. And I think that having that perspective and kind of outlook can be beneficial when we're looking at the issues and problems facing our communities in our nation today.
100%. Again, like you hit the nail on the head. History is always in motion. There's always something going on that's going to affect the future, and there's always something from the past that's affecting today and is going to continue to affect things in the future. The Carving It Up U.S. President's Edition, the first episode 1, will be covering the Founding Fathers, Washington through Monroe. That will air on YouTube and on all podcasting platforms, wherever you listen to your podcast. April 9th, I believe it'll be put out around 7 a.m. So it'll be in the morning. So you can wake up, have yourself a cup of coffee. Hopefully you're off work and listen to a little bit of presidential history. And Isaac Lawson will be joining me throughout that series. Isaac, greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on the show, man. Have a good one.
Thank you. Great being here.
Absolutely. That was Isaac Lawson. Again, this is going to be something very different from the usual Carving It Up format because of the fact that we do have sort of this new, I think maybe a new appreciation of American history and sort of a fascination. I think that I kind of want to capitalize on a little bit in what's going on, in the world today. So I just think it's fascinating. Grady's got another comment. He says, if you ever have the chance to go to Manhattan, go to the house where Teddy Roosevelt grew up in. You'll learn a lot about him. Apparently, Teddy gave FDR a hard time about not going to fight in World War I. I did not know that. Okay, that's something else too, Grady, about presidential history. Everybody out there, that there's so many little things. I mean, I learned the other day, and I'm sure people out there listening, probably know this. So I'm probably late to the party, but the classic, we talked about Richard Nixon for a little bit and then the, complex individual that he was. Richard Nixon's famous I am not a crook speech, or it wasn't really a speech, it was more of a quote. He was answering questions. That came in all places. It didn't happen at the White House. It didn't happen, in Washington. It didn't happen to one of these elaborate, state houses or anything. No, it happened at Disney's Contemporary Resort in Orlando, Florida. It happened in Disney World. The I'm not a crook. That happened at Disney. So it's really funny. And as we get into later episodes, I know Isaac has, I think he has a few presidential impressions up his sleeve. I've got a couple. I can do a little Obama, Trump, and Biden, and a smidgen of Clinton. More recent presidents. I can't do Reagan and Carter. I've tried so hard to do Carter. I can't get the sort of Georgia Southern draw, even though I am a Southern guy from Tennessee, but hey, it is what it is. But there you go. I'll put it up again. The Carving It Up U.S. President's Edition with me, with Isaac Lawson, who you just heard on the show. I can't wait for. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and sort of with this new brand change, I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So, moving on. Last topic of the day: the NFL overtime rules has been something that has been in the discussion for months now. It really started after the game of the year, Kansas City, Buffalo, divisional round. Obviously, you had Mahomes versus Josh Allen. Many argue those are the two best quarterbacks in the National Football League. And obviously, people talk about it. Well, because Josh Allen didn't get the ball in overtime, of course, Chiefs won the coin toss. They go down, they score the winning touchdown, and that's all she wrote for that. People said, hey, as well as Josh Allen played, he deserved to get the ball back. Now, I agree. Josh Allen did not deserve to lose that football game. Now, to be fair, obviously, Mahomes didn't either. Both quarterbacks were spectacular. Unbelievable. But I think the thing that everybody is missing, and I saw this a few years ago, remember, and this always happens in the playoffs, but remember the Saints-Rams NFC Championship game, the worst pass interference call that has ever not been called, right? Because you had, I think it was Tommy Lee Lewis was the receiver. It might have been somebody else who gets absolutely blasted. Was it Nikhil Roby-Coleman, I think, was the defensive back, just gets, blasted as Drew Brees' pass is coming for him. If they call pass interference, the Saints are going to run the clock out, and they're going to kick the game-winning field goal, and they're going to be going to the Super Bowl. Okay, so obviously, and rightfully so, there was outrage over that call. But what I said then, I didn't have a show back then, but what I said then, and I've repeated on the show, I'll say it again. The thing for the Saints, and people forget about this, okay, it doesn't get called, they kick the field goal. You had an opportunity to stop the Rams. If you stop the Rams, you go into the Super Bowl. You couldn't. They kicked a field goal. You win the coin toss. You get the ball. You got a chance to score and win the game, and nobody's going to even remember the pass interference. No, Drew Brees throws an interception. Well, now you have a chance to stop the Rams again. Nope, they kick the game-winning field goal, and then they're onto the Super Bowl, and your season's over. The Saints have multiple opportunities to win that football game. But the Saints whined to the media, they whined to the National Football League, and as a result, they got passed that you could review pass interference. And what happened with that? They got rid of it after 1 year. Nobody liked it. Pass interference almost never was reversed. And it's not as, here's the thing, penalties in football, for the most part, unless it's blatantly obvious, are really hard to overturn. They're not like basketball penalties. Right, that's why you see oftentimes, because you can challenge, one foul a game in the NBA or one call a game. It's different if a ball is out of bounds, or if a guy's foot is out of bounds, or if it's a 3 or a 2. Most times, more often than not, if there's like a foul inside within 2 feet of the basket, a guy going up, say the guy goes straight up and they call a foul, even if it's still not a foul, they almost never reverse it. If you notice on the foul calls in the NBA, and so the thing with this NFL overtime. My thing is, this has been something that fans have complained about, the overtime rules, but it was never like the top of everybody's discussion. The thing that I heard and what I complained about myself on the show is the bad, taunting rules. Nobody likes the taunting rules. Nobody was asking for new taunting rules, but the NFL instituted them. And to the Bills, to be fair to the Bills, an organization and obviously a quarterback and a coach I have a ton of respect for, they weren't the ones. They weren't like the Saints. They weren't whining to the media. They weren't doing that, right? They weren't engaging in that kind of nonsense. But here's the thing that people are forgetting: if the Bills, who scored what looked like the winning touchdown with 13 seconds left, they're up by 3. Just stop Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs from getting in the field goal range in 11 seconds. Could you do that? Because if you do that, there's no overtime, and the Bills would have advanced the AFC Championship game, and I think they would have beaten Cincinnati and got to the Super Bowl. Stop them. It's easy to say, well, why you ask us to stop the Chiefs? It's Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and formerly Tyreek Hill and all the weapons. 13 seconds. Could you stop them from getting in a field goal range in 11 seconds? Because there was two seconds left, and they kicked the field goal that tied it and sent it to OT. And something else, too. The Chiefs won the coin toss after they kicked the field goal to tie it. They win the coin toss, as I mentioned, and they go boom, 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 down the field, touchdown to Travis Kelce, walk off, see you later. That's it. The exact same thing happened a week later. What did they do? They kicked the game-tying field goal as time expired to send it to overtime. And the Chiefs won the coin toss. And Patrick Mahomes on the third play of overtime throws a pick. And the Bengals go right down the field, boom, boom, boom. They kick the game-winning field goal, and they're on to the Super Bowl. It's not like Kansas City got the ball first both times, went down the field both times, and scored. No. It was literally the opposite. They score the first time around and win the game, and then the next time around they throw, in a sense, because it was a short field, a game-ending interception. So, but I will say this. At least the NFL overtime, you know me. I've always called it the C word. It's like it's become like a bad word in today's society. Compromise. Like people hate to say, it's like, ooh, don't say that. You might want to bleep that word out because we tend to not compromise at all. But what I will say is at least the rule change, which by the way, my bad, I didn't really my apologies, I didn't really get into what the rule changes were. Basically, it's pretty simple. Whoever wins the coin toss in overtime, they get the ball first, regardless of what happens, unless they throw like a pick six or something. The other team is going to get the ball, and they're going to have a chance. And if they score, it's sudden death. It's sudden death. Next score wins the game. That's only going to apply to the playoffs. Now, I hope, I'm crossing my fingers, that it doesn't spread to the regular season as well. That's my thoughts. Grady says, I dislike the new overtime rules in the NFL. Let's see. Hold on. I'm trying to get to your other comment. Too much favoritism of offense. Do you feel like they should be able to review pass interference in the last 2 minutes of each half? Because I feel like that's reasonable. The last 2 minutes of each half. I mean, I would say the same thing. I think even if you review it in the last 2 minutes of the first half, I think I don't think it changes much because, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think it was like 6%. The 1 year that they had the pass interference review thing in place, 2019, I think like 6% or something crazy. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and Google it while we're on live. Might as well go and do it. How many pass interference calls overturned in 2019? Okay. 13 of 81. So that's not 6%. It's 16%. So 16% of the calls were overturned. So I still don't think that's going to change a lot because even Grady, if we relegate it to just the last 2 minutes of each half, that number is going to go down. I mean, it really is. I don't think, my thing is, I don't think we should change a rule based on an outlier. Like that bad, awful, horrendous. I mean, I've made no bones about it. It's probably the worst missed call in NFL history. Literally. It's not the worst postseason call ever. That's the Tuck rule. Okay. The Tuck rule literally started the Patriots dynasty. But the missed pass interference call, the Saints-Rams game, it's the worst missed call I've ever seen in my life in the NFL. Ever. That doesn't mean we don't see that every week. If we saw it every week, okay, I see what you're saying. But it's not like it became like a trend. We see bad pass interference calls, misses, and calls every week. You know, we see the flag come out. We're like, that's not pass interference. And then sometimes we'll see contact. We're like, hey, where's the yellow flag? Like, where is it? So that's the only thing is you can't. I mean, that's the shame of it all. This is why I defend officials more than most. Is that it's the one spot on the field or on the court, depending on what sport it is, where you have to be perfect. You have to be perfect. Otherwise, the fans are gonna be pissed off. Even if you're perfect, you know, the fans who, you know, are on the other end of the call or no call are still gonna be mad at you. So that's the only thing. If refs were as accurate as the best hitter in Major League Baseball, let's say Jose Altuve. He's always, I don't like Jose Altuve, obviously, but let's say he has high batting averages. Let's say he bats 330. That's amazing. You bat 330. It's unbelievable. You know, you make 33% of the calls correctly in the NFL. your butt's getting fired, right? And that's the case in most industries because it's so hard to hit a baseball without a question. Grady's the Patriots fan in here. He just threw all objectivity just out the back door. He says, "Hey, that Tuck rule was a good call," and obviously he's kidding. He's got the laughing emoji. Yeah, it was the worst. It was the worst call in a playoff game ever. It's not even close. The Tuck rule is the worst call in NFL history, and in the postseason that I've seen. I don't think it's particularly close. But yeah, listen, man, it's going to cause some debate, and I would like to see. Let's just say two. I think were there only two overtime games in the playoffs last year. I think the Chiefs played in the only two. Yeah, that was it. Because remember, we had that great divisional weekend, and a couple of those games looked like they were going to overtime, but either it was a turnover or something else happened. But that's the aspect of it. Grady asks, he asks, what's a worse blunder than the PI, that PI in the Rams versus Saints, or the Fail Mary of Seattle versus Green Bay? Oh my gosh, the Fail Mary. That was in the refs lockout in 2012. That was awful. I would still say that the PI in the Saints-Rams game, it's a playoff game, A. And B, I mean, it's the most obvious thing ever. Clearly, yes, Golden Tate didn't catch that Hail Mary. That was clearly an interception. But I guess you could, like, if you really want to try and play devil's advocate, you could say he kind of had possession. I mean, he really didn't. But like, there's no argument that can be made that the Rams Saints PI wasn't PI or even wasn't helmet to helmet contact. There was really 2 flags on that play. Like there's actually not an argument you can make about Rams Saints. There's at least a bad argument that could be made for the Hail Mary. So I would still say Rams versus Saints. But in terms of regular season games, I would put bad calls, at least in recent memory, because I'm not going to go through NFL history. I was born in 03, guys. I can't go back too far. I would say the 2 worst calls or no calls in a regular season game, the Hail Mary's there. I would say the Calvin Johnson play, which of course came back to bite the Cowboys in the playoff game against the Packers, but the Calvin Johnson play against the Bears, it was week 1 of 20, was it 2010? Was it 09? It might have been the 0-16 Lions season, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember what year that was, but it was Calvin Johnson. He makes as Calvin Johnson would do, as Megatron would do, he makes a ridiculous catch in the end zone that seemingly wins the game. He comes down with it, sets the ball on the ground, and they say it was an incomplete pass. Like it's Grady says the Hail Mary is more funny than anything, to be honest. It was funny. It was the announcer's reaction of it. Tirico, Mike Tirico, the great announcer who obviously was with Monday Night Football at the time. Just the reaction to it was like, what on earth? I actually can't believe they reviewed this and still made the same call. Because also, and I'll read, he says, I remember coming to school, my buddies and I were just laughing our butts off at that. Yeah. And what I think the funniest part about it was that you had one referee signaling touchdown, the other referee signaling, incomplete. And so it's like, what's going on right now? What is going on? It was chaos. It was absolute, positively chaos. All right, that is all the time we have for today's show. Appreciate everybody stopping by. A big thank you to my man Isaac Lawson for showing up on Carving Up Live to promote the new series, the Carving It Up U.S. Presidents Edition. It's going to be fun. Again, the first episode, April 9th, Saturday morning. It'll be up there around 7 a.m. Eastern, 4 a.m. Pacific. Please, for those of you on the West Coast, you don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. to listen to this. I promise. I promise. I don't want to put you through that. But it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to you guys listening to it. And it's certainly something of fascination to me. And hopefully those of you out there who want to listen will feel that same or at least share those same sentiments. So I will be back tomorrow. Finally back on a Friday. I think I missed the last 2. So finally back on a Friday. We got a loaded show for tomorrow. I've already got the topics planned. I know Bobby Wagner signed with the Rams. I'll discuss that tomorrow. Just didn't have the time to get into it today. But hope everybody has a great evening. Continue to stay safe out there. See y'all tomorrow. God bless you all. Peace out. Man, I'll tell you what. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube. Be sure to click that big red subscribe button and go check out the other clips and full shows of Carving It Up Live. Have a blessed day.